license, registration, and proof of insurance.
Why did you try to get into my car?
Sir, I need your license, because I can't see your hands when I first moved.
What are you scared? Are you scared, little coward?
I need your license.
Are you scared?
I need your license.
Are you scared? There you go. See?
Thank you, sir.
Shut the fuck up.
The stop begins without ceremony. No raised voices yet. No flashing warnings of what's coming. Just the quiet friction that forms when two people decide, almost instantly, that neither will yield first. One sits inside a car, contained, limited by space and glass. The other stands outside, unrestricted, carrying the full weight of the uniform. At first, it looks ordinary. That's what makes it dangerous. Control in these encounters is rarely seized all at once. It's tested in inches. A request that sounds routine. A refusal that sounds calm. A pause that lingers a second too long. Power starts shifting before anyone notices it happening. The officer doesn't begin with force. He begins with insistence. The kind that doesn't ask, only repeats. The repetition is important. It narrows the field of options. Each time the same demand is restated, alternatives quietly disappear. Compliance or conflict. Nothing in between. Inside the vehicle, the driver stays still. Stillness here is not passive, it's deliberate. He limits movement, keeps actions visible. He does not reach, he does not fidget. In a space where sudden motion can be reinterpreted at will, restraint becomes a form of self-defense. The officer moves closer, not aggressively, just close enough to alter the balance. Proximity changes the temperature of the moment. It transforms conversation into pressure. When distance collapses, so does neutrality. There's no shouting yet, just tone, a subtle hardening. The voice shifts from procedural to personal. This is where many encounters turn quietly, when enforcement stops sounding like a role and starts sounding like an ego. The request becomes a demand. The demand becomes a challenge. And once it's a challenge, someone has to win. The driver's refusal is consistent. It does not escalate. It does not soften either. Consistency is a problem in encounters like this. It denies the officer an opening. No emotional spike to justify intervention. No visible threat to react to, just a closed loop. That's when frustration enters. You can hear it before you see it. The cadence tightens. The pauses disappear. The officer stops waiting for responses. He speaks over them. Authority doesn't like silence when it expects submission. The camera captures something subtle. The officer's stance changes. Feet repositioned. Shoulders squared. It's unconscious, but it matters. The body prepares before the mind commits. This is escalation without announcement. The driver remains seated, hands visible, voice steady. But the calm begins to feel brittle, like glass under pressure. Calm only works when both sides agree to respect it. When one side decides calm is defiance, it becomes justification. The officer frames the situation around safety. Safety is flexible. It can expand to cover almost anything. When safety is invoked, discretion widens. Boundaries blur. The conversation stops being about compliance and becomes about control. There's a moment where the officer reaches toward the vehicle. It's brief, incomplete, but irreversible. Physical intent has entered the space. Once that happens, the encounter cannot reset. The option to disengage quietly disappears. From here on, every action will be interpreted through that lens. Threat perception replaces procedure. The rules become secondary to feelings. The driver reacts verbally, not physically. His words sharpen, insults surface. This is a mistake, but an understandable one. When physical boundaries feel threatened, people reach for language as a shield. It rarely works. The officer seizes on the tone, not the actions. Tone is easier to punish. Tone is subjective. Tone can be framed as aggression without evidence. Backup is mentioned. Even before it's called, the idea changes the dynamic. Backup signals that the situation is no longer contained. It raises stakes without resolving anything. More uniforms mean fewer exits. Time stretches. Nothing happens, yet everything does. The stop stops being about a traffic issue. It becomes a test of dominance. Who will concede first? Who will blink? This is the danger zone of modern policing. Not chaos. Not violence, but stalemate. Stalemate breeds resentment. Resentment invites escalation. The officer steps away briefly. Distance returns, but it doesn't restore balance. The damage is done. Control has already shifted from process to power. Whatever comes next will carry that weight. When the officer returns, the energy is colder. Decisions feel pre-made. The encounter is no longer unfolding, it's concluding. Citations appear. Paper replaces conversation. The authority now speaks through forms and penalties. This is how power reasserts itself when persuasion fails. The driver argues, but it no longer matters. The outcome is set. Resistance now only accumulates consequences. Each word becomes another mark, another justification, another note. What began as a stop has turned into a record, a trail, a future problem waiting to mature. The officer leaves with control intact but diminished. The driver remains legally free, but constrained by what follows him from this moment forward. Neither side truly wins. This is how routine stops quietly evolve into something heavier. Not through sudden violence, but through incremental decisions that narrow choices until conflict becomes inevitable. And once inevitability sets in, no one is really in control anymore. After the first rupture, everything carries momentum. The encounter doesn't reset, it drifts. Like a vehicle out of alignment, pulling steadily in one direction. Correction becomes harder the longer it continues. The arrival of additional officers changes the geometry of the scene. Space shrinks. Angles multiply. Even without movement, pressure increases. More observers mean more interpretations, more justifications, more risk. The original officer no longer needs to persuade. Presence alone does the work. Authority becomes ambient. It surrounds rather than confronts. The driver tries to reframe the situation. He explains, he repeats himself, he appeals to consistency, but explanations don't function well once power has consolidated. They sound like resistance, regardless of intent. The supervising presence doesn't escalate, but it doesn't de-escalate either. Neutrality here is not balance, it's endorsement through silence. The absence of correction is its own decision. Paperwork becomes the central tool. It's impersonal, clean. It carries consequences without requiring force. This is the quiet endgame of many encounters. When physical control is unnecessary, administrative control takes over. The driver talks about the future now. Court, records, consequences. He's already moved beyond the stop because the stop is no longer where the real conflict lives. The real conflict is what this moment will become later. The officer remains focused on the present, completing the process, finalizing the outcome. This difference in perspective matters. One side sees a task, the other sees a trajectory. Voices rise again, briefly, not out of fear, but frustration. The kind that comes from realizing the window for resolution has closed. Words now only echo. The citations are explained, but explanation doesn't equal legitimacy. It's simply the final step in a sequence that began much earlier. The justification sounds procedural, but the decision feels personal. The driver's recording continues. The camera is steady. It doesn't argue. It doesn't interrupt. it just exists. Its presence is silent, but it shapes behavior, not enough to prevent escalation, enough to document it. There's a moment where everyone seems tired. The adrenaline has passed. What's left is irritation and cleanup. This is often when mistakes crystallize, not when emotions peak. The officer delivers instructions, deadlines, processes, future penalties. Each one extends the encounter beyond the roadside. The stop now has a life of its own. The driver responds with disbelief more than anger. Disbelief that such a small interaction has grown so large, that the cost feels disproportionate to the original reason for contact. This is where many people begin to disengage emotionally. Compliance without agreement. Listening without accepting. It's a coping mechanism. The officers prepare to leave. The scene loosens. Tension dissipates, but it doesn't vanish. It settles. Like dust after movement stops. As vehicles pull away, the imbalance remains. One side returns to routine. Another carries paperwork, deadlines, uncertainty. The stop is over, but the impact isn't. For the officer, it becomes a completed shift detail. For the driver, it becomes an unresolved problem. This asymmetry is built into the system. Encounters end at different times for different people. The camera keeps recording even after the uniforms recede. That's telling. The danger, from the driver's perspective, hasn't passed. It's simply changed form. He talks through what just happened. Not to convince anyone there, to process, to anchor his own understanding. When authority feels arbitrary, narration becomes a way to reclaim agency. But agency here is limited. The next steps are no longer optional, they're scheduled, mandated, codified. This is how control persists without presence, through future obligations that extend the reach of the encounter far beyond the roadside. Nothing dramatic happens now, and that's the point. Most consequences arrive quietly, through mail, through court dates, through suspended privileges. The stop ends without sirens, without force, without arrests. Yet it leaves behind something heavier than noise, a paper trail with teeth. And that is often the most enduring form of power. Time passes. The immediate stress fades, but the implications sharpen. What felt chaotic on the roadside becomes structured in the aftermath. Forms replace voices. Systems replace discretion. The driver's focus shifts entirely to consequence. Not what was said, but what was issued. Not how it felt, but what it triggers. This is where the true weight of the encounter settles. Traffic stops are designed to be brief, but their outcomes rarely are. A citation is not a moment, it's a process. One that unfolds slowly, methodically, without emotion. The imbalance continues. The officer does not need to justify himself again. The system absorbs his actions as inputs, not questions. Review, if it comes, is distant and abstract. For the driver, everything becomes immediate. Deadlines matter, language matters. Missing a step compounds risk. Compliance now is no longer optional, it's enforced by time. The encounter has shifted fully from human interaction to bureaucratic momentum. There is no body language to read now, no tone to adjust to, only instructions. This transition is where many people feel the sharpest sense of helplessness. You can't explain yourself to a form. You can't reason with a deadline. The recording becomes important now, not as protection in the moment, but as memory, a way to anchor events against official narratives. Without it, recollection alone would be fragile. The driver reviews what happened again and again, searching for the precise moment where things went wrong. These moments are rarely dramatic, they're usually subtle. A step closer, a repeated demand, a refusal that hardened into defiance. This is the psychology of escalation. Not explosive, but accumulative. each choice narrowing the path until only one outcome remains. The officer's actions will likely never be revisited unless challenged. The system assumes correctness by default. Effort is required to interrupt that assumption. For the driver, interruption requires resources: time, money, emotional bandwidth. Not everyone has those readily available. That's where quiet coercion lives. Most people comply not because they agree, but because resistance is expensive. The system understands this. It doesn't need to threaten, it only needs to wait. From a distance, the stop looks uneventful. No violence, no arrest. Nothing that would draw immediate attention. But the absence of spectacle does not mean the absence of harm. Harm here is diffuse. Stress, anxiety, financial pressure, distrust. These don't appear on reports, but they linger long after. The power exercised on the roadside echoes forward. Not loudly, persistently. The driver's language grows more reflective now, less confrontational. He's no longer speaking to authority, he's speaking around it, documenting, preserving. This is a common aftermath. When direct challenge fails, people turn to records, to future audiences, to delayed accountability. Whether that accountability arrives is uncertain. What is certain is that the encounter has reshaped the driver's relationship with authority. Trust, once strained, rarely snaps back cleanly. The system moves on. Officers rotate shifts. Stops blend together. Memory fades where repetition is constant. But for the individual, this stop becomes a reference point, a before and after. A moment where neutrality felt conditional. The danger of these encounters is not that they always end badly. It's that they normalize friction. They teach people to expect conflict where cooperation should exist. Over time, that expectation becomes self-fulfilling. This stop did not end in violence. It did not end in arrest. It ended in paperwork and resentment. And that is often enough. Because systems don't require force to maintain control. They only require compliance. And compliance, once compelled, leaves a residue. The camera finally turns off. The road continues. Traffic flows. On the surface, nothing has changed. But for one person, the meaning of a flashing light in the mirror has shifted permanently. And that quiet shift is the real story.